Hello, everyone, and welcome to another lunchtime Cloud Secrets to Go session here with the Copenhagen Azure User Group. We are happy to have you here with us today. And let me just show you a little bit about who we are, where you can find us, usually on Meetup. This session is, of course, streaming live on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. You can find us on Twitter if you have suggestions for talks that you would like to present yourself or that you would like to see. But anyway, today's session is all about chaos. We are joined by Wesley from Intercept, who will talk about Azure Chaos Studio. So welcome, Wesley.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So I'm looking forward to learning about Azure Chaos Studio. I haven't had a chance to look at it myself, so quite curious to see what's actually possible to do, and hopefully learn some new things and tricks.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice feature. It was announced a couple of months ago. I think it's well, it's obviously on a preview, but it's one of those hidden gems that everyone should try it out. Maybe it's not ready for your production yet, but it's definitely getting there, and it's a really exciting feature to play with. So that's what I want to show today.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, should we just get you started, and I'll add your
Yeah.
slides to the deck, and then I'll just remove myself so you can take it away,
All
and I
right.
will keep an eye on questions in the chat.
Yeah.
But then we'll do Q&A afterwards.
Perfect.
Cool.
Perfect. So well, let's get started then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Azure Chaos Studio. It's I believe it's been announced or it's been released somewhere around Ignite last year, and it's all about chaos engineering. And lots of companies have been doing it in the past couple of years. Obviously, we want to do that with our Azure infrastructure as well. We want to look at how resilient it is, and Chaos Studio is going to be the tool to help us do that. So my name is Wesley, work as a lead Azure architect at Intercept. I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP. And if you've got any questions, well, it's just been said, you can put them in the chat or we can do a Q&A after. If you've got any questions afterwards, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or send me an email. And I'm always happy to discuss stuff and anything related to Azure, really. All right, so the agenda for today, and we're going to spend this lunch creating some chaos and see what we can do with Azure Chaos Studio. So we're going to talk a little bit about chaos engineering. We're going to look at some common problems. We're going to talk about the requirements that you need to implement before using Chaos Studio. But most of all, it's just going to be a demo and just let's try it. Let's see how it works. Let's see what we can do. And let's see if we can break some stuff. And then in the end, make it better. So if we talk about chaos engineering, then well, it's first of all and most of all, it's preventive. Um, the whole idea behind it is to simulate DR scenarios, test the resiliency of your solution. If you've got, let's say you've got a website running, and you want to know what happens when the CPU starts throttling, or you want to know what happens if you run out of memory, and if that happens, how resilient is your infrastructure, and are there components in place? Is there infrastructure in place to make sure that the user experience is not going to be impacted? So do we have high available scenarios? And obviously we want to test that before we go into production. And if we build new stuff, we want to test that before that goes to production. We just want to really test those DR scenarios, whether they're automated or whether you want to test the response of your managed services team or your ops team. That is what you want to do with chaos engineering. And there are companies in the world, companies like Netflix, who do it every day, all day. You've got companies who do it once a week, once a month, or do a really big DR drill every year. That is up to you, but you need the tooling to do that. And if you really want to get into the nitty and gritty of it, you need quite a lot of tools. And Azure Chaos Studio is meant to make that easier for you. But what's really important when you do chaos engineering, it's also a mindset, and it really goes well with the DevOps mindset. It goes really well with a lot of different company cultures. It's not about pointing fingers. If you have a team who build infrastructure and you're going to start doing chaos engineering and you're going to start breaking stuff, it's going to, you're going to stop virtual machines, you're going to, destroy pods on an AKS cluster, you're going to change network security groups, break DNS, do whatever you want. That will be a scenario where your ops team is going to jump in, and I can guarantee you there will be a scenario where everyone will go, hey, we didn't really think that part through. It broke the infrastructure. We need to fix that. And what's important here is it's meant to help you do better. It's not about just the outage. It's not about breaking stuff and then pointing fingers. Hey, you didn't do your job. So, hey, we found something that we've all overlooked, that we all forgot about. How can we do better that if this is the case, if the whole West Europe region in Azure goes down, do we have everything in place to get back up and running in a different region? So we want to fix that before our customers will ever experience that. So it's about doing better, not about breaking stuff and pointing fingers. Because if you start doing this, it's going to be really easy to start pointing fingers, because you will 100% find something that you should do better. So if we look at some common problems when it comes to infrastructures in general, I work as a consultant and as an architect, so I implement a lot of infrastructures at customers. I do the designs, I implement them. And what we always put in the design is the DR scenario. How do you deal with disaster recovery? Does that mean you need to have 2 copies of your infrastructure? Are we going to do it just with backup and restore procedures? There's a whole world in between that. You can go all the way, or you can do it very minimum. But what I see a lot is that companies go, all right, we're going to start building this on Azure. And to just get my product up and running, I need a couple of virtual machines and this and that. But I'm a software company, and I also need the financial momentum to actually have all the redundancy in place. So for now, let's just do single instance virtual machines. Let's just keep it running like that. And then once we go to production, we'll make sure that we have that redundancy. The case, however, in practice is that a lot of companies really don't do that last step. They will tell you, all right, we'll do that later, but later will never happen. So what will happen is when you actually need that DR scenario, it's not going to be there, or there's going to be a compliance officer or an ops team that starts getting really nervous because the environment keeps getting bigger and bigger. You've got more customers. There's bigger risks if something goes down. And then the question is, did we think about, did we even think about that? So it is something you want to do from the start, or at least what you want to do if you decide not to implement your complete DR scenario from the start, which is definitely not recommended, but I do understand that companies choose not to do it from time to time. If you choose not to do it, at least make sure that you can do some proper chaos engineering. For instance, use Azure Chaos Studio and have the report and have the insights on what will happen if something goes down. So you at least know what the impact will be. And then you can make a proper risk analysis, a proper assessment, and know what the impact is. And then you can make a good decision. You can still decide not to do it, but at least make sure that you have determined what the impact is. And last but not least, DR testing is often seen as a one-time thing. I cannot count the amount of times that, all right, we're going to implement DR, we're going to implement backup, we're going to do a restore test. All right, it works. And then people will go, no, we'll periodically check our backup and recovery. We'll periodically check our disaster recovery. And then my question is, what is your definition of periodically? Because if I look at it in practice, in reality, in production, sometimes people do that just once a year, maybe not even. And so what's really important to understand is that DR is not a one-time thing. It is a continuous process. It should be embedded into your ops organization. And once again, that is where chaos engineering will definitely help you. So Azure Chaos Studio, Really big remark here. It is still in preview, and you will notice during the demos that it is definitely preview. But what it does is it allows you to create what we call experiments. And experiments can contain a couple of steps like restart a virtual machine or push the memory usage to its maximum or run with 50% CPU usage for the next 20 minutes, disable DNS or disable a service or restart some pods on Kubernetes. You put those things in an experiment. And what you will see is where I've got some things prepared, but we'll also just onboard a virtual machine to Azure Chaos Studio from the get-go because there are some quirks and some flaky things that you need to take into account because obviously it's still in preview. But it is chaos engineering out of the box. You can literally get your first experiment up and running within about 30 minutes. Like you can grab the documentation and you probably don't even need it because it's that easy to get started. And then we've got two different scenarios of ways of configuring it, and you can combine the two, or you can just use one of the two. The first one is what we call agentless, or which is called service direct, which means that if we've got a virtual machine or network security group, we can onboard it to Azure Chaos Studio. And basically what we're doing is just configuring a managed identity that can talk to that Azure resource. So that gives you the ability to create experiments and go, all right, I want to restart that virtual machine, or I want to change some rules in that network security group, or I want to, anything really specific to Azure. And then we've got the agent that we can install. And that means that if you're running a virtual machine, and for Kubernetes, that is called the Chaos Mesh service, which will install a couple of pods that allows you to interact with Kubernetes directly. It will actually allow you to change configuration or cause problems within that machine. So for a Windows machine, it will install an agent, and we can actually, say, let's run for 100 CPU. Let's stop that service. Let's reconfigure something. Let's kill a process and see what happens. It is supported for Windows and Linux. Windows works out of the box. Linux requires you to configure some agent configuration within the Linux operating system, but it's very well documented. During these demos, I will be using Windows machines and some Kubernetes. In Kubernetes, you need to install the Chaos Mesh services, which are also really well documented in the Microsoft documentation. It's about 2 or 3 Helm commands, and you've got it up and running. That's the easiest part. Yeah, it's that easy. So within Chaos Studio, before we jump into the demo, I already mentioned experiments. So you will create an experiment that will perform certain steps within a branch, and you can add faults and delays. So within an experiment, you can have one or multiple steps, and the steps are basically a group of different actions. But within a step, you will have a branch. And within that branch, you will say, I will have 2 faults, which is memory goes to 100%, CPU goes to 100%. So that's within a branch. Now, if you want to run stuff in parallel, which is not supported for every configuration, you would configure a second branch within that step. So then they will run in parallel. If I want to, we're going to do that in a demo as well. Let's say I want to change a network security group and I want to change 2 rules at the same time. I would create one experiment with 1 step and then 2 branches, one that will disable port 3389 and one that will disable port 80, and they will run at the same time. Once that is done, you can have a next step, and within a step, you can do some logical grouping. So for instance, I would have a step restart virtual machines, and then I would restart a bunch of virtual machines within that step, and then the next step would contain a branch with a fault that would pump up the CPU to 100% or kill all Internet Explorer or Internet Explorer Explorer.exe processes. What that looks like, it's probably easier to explain that when we go to the Azure portal. So we're going to start with that now. I'm going to end that slideshow, and then I should be able to put up my Chaos Studio here. There we go. So here we are in the Azure portal, and I can just go. So if I would start from the start, I can go Chaos Studio. Really, really big remark here that it's in preview. It definitely is. I'm just going to open up the documentation for future reference. So I'm just going to put that in here. And so this is the starting screen. And it doesn't look like much yet, but once you start playing with it, you can actually figure out that, you can do more than you think. And what we need to start with is defining some targets. So I've got some infrastructure, I've got virtual machine running, I've got an AKS environment running, and what I can do is just go through my environment and see that I've got some resources that are supported. Not everything is supported yet. That support will probably come in the future, but for now it's Cosmos DB, network security groups, some DNS, AKS, things like app services are not supported yet. So we're going to take a look at that. I've got a virtual machine here, VM01 West Europe, but we're going to use that in a demo in a bit. We got a machine here, VM002, and we can see that there's nothing enabled. So what I can do is click on that machine and go, all right, enable targets. And here you got that option, enable service direct targets. So what I can do is click on this, and now it will provide me that feature that says, all right, you can stop the virtual machine, you can restart it, you can leave it off for about 10 minutes. You can do a lot with that already. So we're just going to go back to Chaos Studio. It says, all right, it's done. Deployment succeeded. So now if we check the targets and we go to that VM002, probably takes a bit to update. Yeah, we're not going to wait for that to pop up. But what we also want to do is install that agent. So it's going to install the Chaos extension on the virtual machine. So I would click that. And here you go. Here is what it's going to ask me. So to connect to that virtual machine and interact with it, I need to have a managed identity. So what I did, it needs a user-assigned managed identity, which you also need to provide permissions on the resource that you want to perform your experiments against. I created one Chaos identity, already gave that the right permissions in my subscription. And I'm going to go with App Insights for now and do review and enable. And now it's going to install that agent on a virtual machine using that user-assigned managed identity, so it can do its thing. That is all it takes to onboard a machine into Chaos Studio. If we go back to Chaos Studio, we go back to targets. Eventually, this will pop up with, all right, so the service direct's already been updated, and in a bit, it will also update the agent-based. So if I click on this, I now have that option, manage actions. If I manage actions, I can see that this is done through the service direct, VM shutdown, but I've also got agent-based capabilities. Obviously, I cannot really do anything here now because that agent is still installing. So out of the box, if I don't want to install any agent, I can onboard all my virtual machines and have the capability to shut them down. So if I've got 100 virtual machines, maybe I want to shut down 99 of them and see if my environment starts scaling or see what happens, what will the user experience and the impact on that be. Very basic, but I expect that to have additional features in the future. What that Service Direct feature is really powerful for is that it also allows you to interact with different Azure resources. So for instance, I've got a network security group here for a virtual machine we'll be using in the demo. I can click on Manage Actions, and you can see that I've got the option to configure a network security rule. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. So once that thing is done updating, we've got the VM002 somewhere here. So it's enabled. I can now manage actions again. And you can see I can now pick which things I want to change. Maybe I don't want to allow someone to configure changing the CPU pressure. So that is really important, that you can just select everything. In the demo, we will select everything. But what's important is that if let's say I know that my environment will definitely crash beyond quick repair if I stop a specific service. I just want to disable that feature. So then I'm sure that, if someone's going to run a chaos experiment against my environment, they're not going to be stopping any services. So I know that that part is covered. I already got that on a backlog to fix. Once I fixed it, I probably want to tick that box again. But it's just important to know that you can disable specific features. So then what we want to do is, maybe we just want to create an experiment. Already got some pre-prepared, but for the first demo, we're just going to start with how easy is it to get started. Obviously, the thing I didn't demo is deploy the virtual machine, but the virtual machine was deployed, and now I onboard it into Chaos Studio. So now I can create an experiment. And what I want to do is I created the resource group, RG Chaos Experiments, to store my experiments. So I have it nice and grouped. I'm just going to call this VM02 restart. So we know that this is going to be a experiment specific for that virtual machine. In bigger infrastructures, you probably want to have groups of experiments. You can go the whole way, but this is just clearer in a demo. Then we go to the experiment designer, and I can have multiple steps. Like I said, I can add a step, which is going to add a whole new code block. But we're just gonna, I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. We're just gonna go with this step. I'm gonna call this step restart VM. We're just going to have one branch, restart VM. Now, if I want to have two different actions running at the same time, what I would do is add a branch, and it would run these in parallel. However, what's important to understand is if you're running something within the virtual machine, so you're going to do that agent-based thing. Let's say I'm going to start the CPU pressure. I'm going to up the CPU pressure, and I'm going to up the pressure on the memory. You cannot run those in parallel. It will come back with an error going, the agent on the VM is already busy. I cannot do that. That's something that needs to be fixed in the future, because maybe you do want to simulate, what if my memory goes up and my CPU goes up? Or for now, that needs to be two different faults within either a branch or just in a different step. So what I can do is I'm going to add an action. An action can be a fault or add a delay. And the delay is nothing more than just going, all right, you've done this, now wait for 5 minutes. We're going to add a fault, and that fault is going to be VM shutdown. We have a big list of things we can configure. This is currently what's supported. We can simulate DNS failure. We can change the time on a machine, agent-based, but we're now going with just the configuration for the service direct, so no agents involved. We just want to shut down the VM or a VM skill set. We're going to do VM shutdown. It's going to be shut down for, let's do 5 minutes. That's fine. We're going to do abrupt shutdown. So just kill it. Just stop it. Don't do a neat shutdown. Just break it. And we're going to define the target resource. We set VM002. We're going to add that. And now we're going to go to review and create. And now this is where you can see that it's still in preview. This is a bit flaky if you ask me. Before starting your experiment, you need to assign the experiment identity to each resource targeted. So I need to make sure that this is not the chaos identity I just showed you. Every experiment gets its own managed identity. So you need to provide that managed identity with the right permissions on the resource group or just the resource itself. So we're just going to create this. And there is a cool thing within role-based access control. I hope in the future that this will just be automated, like that you can tick a box and go configure the right permissions to shut down a virtual machine. We don't have that now. So if we go to virtual machines here, and we have VM002, which is we're going to do it on a resource group level for now. So we know that if we add other features that we know we can do as well, maybe we want to change something to a network security group within the same experiment. So what I prefer to do is add that permission on a resource group level. Because if we want to simulate shutting down a VM and simulate a change in network security groups, which might be something that happens in practice, right? Someone from the ops teams, well, maybe we should change that maybe we should change the priority on that. Network security rule, that is also something you can simulate. We want to use the same experiment for that because it's the same workload. It still impacts that virtual machine. So I want to do that on a resource group level. Our resource is running on the HCI stack supported is what John is asking in the chat. Currently, this is just Azure, not a HCI stack. I hope it will be supported in the future. If we look at the experiment and the options, we're going to go through that in a bit again. It's still really, really limited to VM skill sets, virtual machines, and AKS. Nothing really outside of that, except for customers to be network security groups. It's only been around for a short time. I think that's what we see a lot these days. What Microsoft does is, right, let's do the minimum viable product. Let's make it preview. Let's have people test with it, and then we start building on top of it, which is nice if you want to release early in the process. But this does still need a lot of work in terms of support. So if this would be a product I would use in an enterprise scenario, not yet, but it's definitely coming. So we need to provide that access to that resource group. And so what we're going to do is just click add role assignment. And for now, I'm just going to not bother with checking specifics. So I'm going to delete this afterwards again. So just make it an owner. But what I want to show you is if I click managed identity, I'm going to go next. Oh, we click managed identity. I'm going to click select members. In the past, it would be a lot of work to find. With this new view, it got better, but in the past, it would be a lot of work to identify which managed identity was it. So what Chaos Studio does is actually provide really specific managed identities, but they're also grouped here. So I go to managed identities, I'm going Chaos experiment, and which experiment do I want to provide with that level of access? And I'm going to go with VM002 restart. I'm going to hit select. I'm going to hit review and assign. And now my experiment has the right permissions. So back to Chaos Studio. What I now want to do is I've got this experiment here. I just want to run it. I just want to click on this. And I want to just have to double check that we've got the machine selected. So what I want to do is just start it. I just want to, this doesn't have any history yet. So what I'm going to do is click start. And it says it's about to start a Chaos experiment that could impact subscription resources or cost series outages. Well, obviously that's what we want to do. We want to see what's going to happen. I just want to hit start. And now we're just doing one machine, but maybe you just want to do 50 or 60. You just configure them. It's going to do that. So it's going to do some pre-processing, and then eventually it should start. And once it starts a step and a branch, you will see here which branch it's starting with. And what we should eventually see here, we go to this machine, that it should change its status from running to stop. Now let's hope that everything populated right. All the permissions sometimes takes a bit for role-based access control to start, but here it's just going to shut down the virtual machine. It says that, and it says it started. So let's see if it's actually doing that. There we go. It stopped. So it stopped the virtual machine. So that would teach, or that would give me the insights. All right, if this was running a website, and it's a single instance VM, it's not in availability zones or availability sets, this is going to impact user experience. And you can just run this every day. You can schedule it through a logic app. You can go above and beyond. But yeah, it stopped. And if we can refresh it, it still stopped. And the reason why it still stopped is that in our experiment, we said, all right, let's do that for, what did we say? How long, run it for how long? 2 minutes, 5 minutes? We said something. We said 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, that machine will start up again. So it's not that Chaos Studio is just breaking it. Once the experiment is done, it will restart that virtual machine. It will come back up. So you want to be, careful of the duration itself. And that is, I think this demo we just did, 15 minutes. It took us 15 minutes to onboard a virtual machine, configure an experiment, and have it restart. And now we know that this is working. We can add a whole bunch of other actions. We can add a fault. Let's and this is important when you. This is how this will impact how you do branching and how you will configure steps, because once this is done, it will start the next action. So after 5 minutes, it will start the virtual machine again. And then once it sends the start VM command, then the next fault in my branch will start. So if I would add a fault that goes, that uses the agent-based one, then we're going to go, all right, kill a process. And then we can, define the process name, and it's going to kill that process. But what we have to take into account is that that virtual machine might still be starting and that process might not be there yet. And that's when your experiment will fail. So that will be a reason to either put it into a different step or add a delay. And then you would add a delay and go, wait for 5 minutes after this step. And then we're going to stop a specific service or kill a process. So that is the reason why you would have multiple faults, why you would have multiple branches, or maybe even multiple steps. Maybe this is just, I named this experiment VM002 restart, but maybe you want to call this VM002 chaos. And then one step would be called restart VM. Another step would be called test capacity, up the CPU, up the memory. And another one would be break DNS or reconfigure the Azure firewall on that virtual machine and see what happens. So I've got a lot of options here, but normally within an experiment, you would do the logical grouping of the workloads you want to test, and you want to have different steps for the different types of testing you want to do. So I would always put restarting VM in a different step, and probably maybe even in the last step. So if you think that a bit through, what you could build is a scenario where I'm gonna have a step one where I'm gonna push the load to 100 CPU for about 20 minutes. Then after 20 minutes, I want to simulate that virtual machine just gave out. So step two, after that CPU was being pushed to 100% for 20 minutes, then the next step is going to be just stop the virtual machine, simulate that it crashed. So then you can also help your ops team in the training. All right, you got dashboarding. You see that it's going up to 100% CPU. And if that keeps going for long enough, the virtual machine will stop. So you can really, you can go above and beyond and think of any, fictional scenario and build it just by defining different steps. So I can even call this, the end of the world for virtual machine scenarios, and start with memory, CPU, crash DNS, and then eventually restart the virtual machines and then see what the DR scenario for that will be. It will help your ops team in training for that DR scenario as well. Other than that, it will give you the insights like, all right, so I've got this running on a single instance virtual machine. That's going to be a problem if this is going to happen. So I probably want to have, a second virtual machine. I want to have load balancing. I want to make my application aware that is being load balanced. So I want to do something with user sessions somewhere else. I want to make it resilient. That is what it will help you with, but it will also help you with simulating a DR scenario for your ops team. Now, this was a fairly simple experiment. And if we go back to Chaos Studio, I've got one prepared, which is called VM Resource Utilization. I'm running on a different virtual machine. And if I'm going to edit this one, it's got different steps. This one is using the agent-based. And this one's I call this step Resource Utilization. And I put in CPU pressure and disk I/O pressure. So what this is going to do for the first 5 minutes, it's going to up the CPU pressure to 99%. And it's going to do that for 5 minutes. And then after that, it's going to do a pressure on the disk I/O for 1 minute. Well, we're at 12:34, so we're not going to do 5 minutes. It's going to be a waste of time. So we're going to try and edit that. Sometimes, so this is the preview part, this will error out and you have to open it again. I'm just going to edit that, or else we're just going to break it off Yeah, we're not gonna wait for that. We're just gonna go back to the, oh, yeah, we have to go to the resource and just click start. Let's see what happens. Just gonna click start. And it's gonna start, and I've got that virtual machine here. We've got that virtual machine. So we just started, and it should start with upping the CPU. So we just keep looking at this. Then in a couple of seconds, once it starts, it should start upping the CPU to, well, a considerable amount. And it should make someone that is monitoring the environment very, very nervous. I'm just gonna check the Azure portal real quick to see if it even started. I'm gonna wait for something. Yeah, there we go. It says it's running, and it's running on the right virtual machine. I'm hoping. Let's click on the details. Running with failures. It failed. And why did it fail? Here we go. Demos unexpected. The parameter to the capability are not as expected. Well, that's not good. Now it says it's running disk pressure. Let's see if we can see that. We can see. So apparently the CPU one failed, but the disk pressure is running. We can see that the disk pressure is running. It's ramping up really quickly. So we see that works. It's going to run for 1 minute. What's important is, so in Azure, you've got different types of disks you can use, and I'm just going with a default one. But if we inspect this tab, we're going to go to this, and maybe we can edit it now. Yeah, we're not going to wait for that. So if I add an action, I'm going to add disk IO pressure. Let's see, disk IO pressure. For Windows, we can see that we can change the pressure mode. So what do you want to simulate? Do you want to simulate throttling on premium storage P50? You've got some options here. I'm just going with the default, but you do have options to fine tune that. The same with the CPU pressure. I'm going to add that fault. I'm going to add some more CPU pressure. I'm going to do pressure. Let's do 80%. And if I'm running a VM skill set, so maybe I do have that high available environment, and by default I'm running on 3 instances, I can go, all right, simulate that pressure on instance 1, 2, and 3, which would tell me if I start running this, and if I set auto scaling, normally you would set that around something 70%. If this starts running on all 3 nodes of my VM skill set, it should start scaling out to a 4th instance. So that would be a way to test that as well. Chaos Studio can definitely help you with that. We're not running a skill set here, so we're not going to do that. I'm going to set this to 5 minutes. We can define the target resource again. So this is how you would configure that. That's all it takes. And then we just hit save. We're just going to delete this one because we don't need that. We're going to delete that one as well. We just did that. It's going to save. And if we go back to that machine, it should, because I told you it will fix it again, it should go back to normal. And we can see that here. If we make this a bit bigger, we see that even though there were some spikes, it is getting back to normal as opposed to what it was. So it's, you can run it, it will break stuff, and then it will make sure that it's coming back up again. Now I do want to try this one more time to see if it now is going to run that CPU thing. Don't know why it broke. Apparently it did. In the meanwhile, if we just check that virtual machine itself, which is this virtual machine, this is what we've been testing on now with the disk pressure, we can see the same thing coming back from the insights and the monitoring. If we go to the workbooks, we can see the same thing. I enabled VM Insights. I think that is a best practice, so could definitely do that. If I click on performance, obviously I've been doing this for multiple days, so we should have some telemetry. I'm just gonna load that up. We don't really care about the heartbeat. We didn't stop this one, but here we can see that CPU utilization. And today, right? Just before the session, it started peaking to 100% to 80%, depending on what you configure. And it goes back to normal. So you can see that Chaos Studio is definitely doing its job. Did the same thing with memory. I found personally that if I configure the memory pressure within Chaos Studio, it doesn't always fully impact the virtual machine. So I left it out in the demo. We can see the telemetry in the Azure portal, but I never really see the usage going to the full allocated memory in the virtual machine. So that might be might require some tweaking in the future. We can see the same thing with the disk, peaking up and down, but it's been normal other than that. So what's also important is that if you start running this, you need to let everyone know that there's going to be jumps in telemetry. Like, I'm doing this, but it will get back to normal. So maybe you don't always want to do it on a production scenario. If your process matured, obviously that would be a good thing to do. But yeah. So what we can see is that now the CPU pressure is running. So we go back to that virtual machine real quick. We can see that it is actually working. I don't know why it errored out earlier, but now we're running at, I said 80% in the test, so it's actually doing 80, 81, 79% for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go back to normal. Then we'll just, it's not sluggish yet. It's still performing. Well, no, it is slow. Yeah, 80% is not good for a virtual machine. So that works. But let's go into a more realistic scenario, right? So what if I have this machine? Let's open up the Azure portal. I've got this machine overview, and it's got a public IP. And what I did is, this one is running a website. So what I've also done is I've created an experiment. So what if something is happening to networking? What is something we're gonna, there's a resource utilization. We can also stop it. If you stop it, it will actually stop. It is really clean. We can see that within the network security groups in a bit as well. If you hit stop, it will actually revert back to the scenario, to the state it was before it started testing. What I mean by that is, if I go to my Azure networking experiment, where I said, hey, what I want to do is I want to deny RDP traffic inbound to my virtual machine. And at the same time, so I created a different branch because these can run in parallel. I want to disable access to port 80 as well. So that should break access to my website. Now, what's important to understand is if you change a network security group setting, so if you create an inbound rule, the connection doesn't terminate because that inbound connection was already made. So you've got an active session. You actually need to reconnect before, to notice. But that is fine. In HTTP traffic, that happens all the time. So we should know it soon enough. So what this would do is it would just create network security rules. And then I can see if my stuff is still running. So if I go back to this one, I hit start. And now what we're going to do really quickly is go back to the networking on that virtual machine. And we can see that right now, this one's got any 3389 and HTTP 80 any. For HTTP, well, obviously in production, you want to do HTTPS, RDP, any. You never want to do that, but it works in the demo. So what this will do, what this experiment will do, is actually start, reconfiguring my inbound port rules. We can see, right? So it already added deny RDP and deny HTTP. It just did that, and that is now in effect. So if I start reconnecting, we need to give it some time to take into effect. But once I start reconnecting my 3389, it will now deny traffic. If I start, accessing that website, it will actually deny traffic. And but then again, if your session is already active, you will not notice. You actually need to start a new session. What I want to show is that this is going to run for 10 minutes. But what if I'm like, oh crap, I just did something, I broke production. I want this to be resolved. So what we can do is we can go back to this one. We can see that it's running. And I can go to the details. I can see, all right, it did reconfigure the network security rule. It did reconfigure, if for port 80, for port 3389, but something is broken. I don't, this is a problem. Now what do I do? So if we go, let's open up PowerShell. What we can see here, I want to put this on a different, my terminal is not opening on the right screen now. Let me do, oh, let's see if I can, it's not really, oh, it's just lagging on my laptop. So what you can see here is if I do an invoke web request to that machine, it's now denied. And I think that is a problem. I don't want that. I broke production help. So I don't want to wait for that 10 minutes. I'm just going to click stop. I'm going to click OK. Now it's going to, if I refresh, it's going to say canceling. Now if I go back, and it's pretty, so we had deny RDP, deny HTTP. If someone remembers, running just-in-time access with Azure Security Center in the past, it made quite a mess of your network security rules. With this, you have full control over the naming, so you can actually, I would in a production scenario, I would prefix this with chaos experiment deny RDP, so everyone knows where it's coming from. But if I'm canceling that thing, if I open it up again, you can see it reverted back to its original scenario. And if we're gonna invoke this, maybe it's not gonna be that fast, but in a couple of seconds, I should be able to access that website again. If we got A here as well. If we're gonna do Control F5, still gonna take some time to load, but it should come back up fairly quickly. So I can revert back to the original scenario by just canceling, which is really a good thing. Now, the last thing I want to show you before we go back to a wrap up is I've also got some stuff running in Kubernetes here. I've got some pods running, and if we go back and let's put this on the screen again, I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. KGAP pods. I've got about 20 pods running here. So this is my high available solution. But is my solution really high available? So I don't just want to, break a virtual machine. What if I start randomly restarting pods within my Kubernetes cluster? Is my application that aware that it can keep running? So if I'm gonna, refresh this page when I have that, that experiment running, will my solution keep working? So what we can do is I've got a pod chaos experiment, and this does require you to install the chaos mesh in Kubernetes that will perform those actions for you. But once you have that, I've got it here. Let's open it up. Let's see if we can see it. So what this is going to do, this is just a little bit of JSON. The documentation on the website, the docs website is really clear on this. What this will do is, for the duration of 30 seconds, it will stop a pod, and it will just do this for 5 minutes. It will just do that randomly to pods. So let's just start that, see what's happening. Let's hit start. I hit OK. I'm just going to start that, and we're going to add these pods. We're going to do cat pod watch. I'm going to see if there's going to be changes in running pods. So what we should see eventually is that the pod restart count is going to go up. So what it would do is just kill a pod, but my Kubernetes configuration says, hey, I want to have multiple instances of my solution running. So this is the replica set to 20. It should always have 20 pods running. So what you can see here is, hey, there was a pod restarted. So this one just restarted. It's got one restart. And it's going to do this for the next 5 minutes, just randomly restart pods. So I can see if my solution is high available. Now, if I go to my page here, we can see I can refresh as much as I want. And we can see we're going to end up at different pods, but it's high available. So this would be a really successful experiment in my scenario because, hey, I built a solution that is high available. I can randomly restart stuff, and it's still working, still up and running. And if we open up the terminal again, we can see this one now restarted twice. So it's doing this one specifically. I can even do it across namespaces. I can do everything in the same namespace. I can even try to break specific Kubernetes stuff, even test how resilient is AKS itself. I can go above and beyond with that. So I think that is pretty powerful. I see a comment in chat from Alan. I would think if there are, the question is, what are the full list of resource types it can be used against? That is pretty limited, and we can see that just to go back. If we go to an experiment, let's just open this one. We can hit edit. If we would add something, and this is currently the resources that are supported. We can do VM shutdowns, VM skill sets, Cosmos DB. So if you're going to try a failover to a different region, network security rules, the one we just did, right, where we disabled port 80 and re-enabled it again. All the AKS stuff, so we can break the AKS DNS. We just did this one, the mesh pod chaos, but we can also do IO networking. And then CPU pressure, which is virtual machines, and network latency, and this is all specific to virtual machines. We can also do arbitrary stress ng stressor. This is really helpful for Linux. You can, have your own configuration that is specific to Linux and then talk against that. But I think if you would look at the resource types, it would be virtual machines, VM skill sets, Cosmos DB, network security groups, and AKS. That is currently what is supported. But there is definitely more to come. And that's what I mean. It's still in preview. And you can see that it's still in preview by things like if you wanted to do branches using the same agent, it will error out because you cannot have two tasks running at the same time. The role-based access control that you need to configure afterwards, personally, I think that's a bit ugly. I would expect that to be automated in the future. But yeah, and I would really hope that full support for things like Azure App Services is going to come, because that would be a great test, stop an app service or start randomly reconfiguring app service plans, things like that. That would be interesting to do. So if we go back to our sheets, let's go this way. So just before we end it, reasons for grouping within experiments. I think this is important. We've seen that, oh, there's a question. Is there a way to randomize the faults that will in an experiment so that you don't have to orchestrate? Klaus, is a good question. Can you, create chaos within the chaos to have random experiments? Not from the Azure portal, but technically you can also do this with ARM templates, got REST API. So technically, you could generate your own random experiment if you do it through the API or using ARM templates. So I would say the answer to the question is a little bit, because how random is, if you randomize yourself, how random is that? But you could go there. But I think other than that, it would be a really good feature request to have that just from the portal, right? So I have a virtual machine, I've got the agent installed, just do random stuff. I don't want to know about it, do it. That is not what's supported currently, but you could build a similar process or a similar, a similar technology yourself, and then call it or time it through a logic app if you want. So the reasons for grouping within experiments is the use of managed identities. So you only need to create one for the experiment, or it creates one for the experiment if it's going to be against the same group of resources. Put them in the same resource group, have that managed identity, or configure that managed identity to have the right permissions on a resource group level, because every time you create a new experiment, you would have to redo that. So that will be a reason to group it. Targets and business logic or line of business applications. I think if you logically group your line of business applications within resource groups, so the same types of applications or everything that's related or everything with the same life cycle is in the same resource group, you could probably use the resource group as the grouping. So everything within the same resource group goes into the same experiment, and then you can cause havoc with the steps and the branches that you can configure. So to wrap it up, we've seen it's definitely in preview. It's definitely a preview, but it does have a promising feature. If you ask me, it does have a lot of potential. I think if this is going to be expanded across resources, it's going to be really cool. A feature I would think is really cool is just let's just stop everything in West Europe and see what happens. I think that would be a good scenario. Simulate the outage of a region. You can still do that now, but you would have to select each individual target. Maybe just want to have a button, have West Europe go down for me. But it is easy to get started. We did within 15 minutes, we onboarded a machine and we created our first experiment, and we've seen that it was shut down and it was restarted eventually. That would be, it's ease of access. However, if you start building bigger experiments, so more like the thing that Klaus is now asking for, what if you want to randomize faults within an experiment? It could become quite overwhelming, and you would definitely have to do it as code. You don't want to deal with those. You don't want to have 20 steps in the portal and 60 faults, and that would become quite messy. So you probably want to do that with infrastructure as code and use source control. But it is a good practice to incorporate in your business. I mean, even though the types of resources currently are limited, if you have those resources, it's good to play with. I mean, it's better than just going to a virtual machine, stop it, and see what the ops team is going to do. You can already start using it, trigger it with a logic app, do it every Friday at 10, or build it now and trigger it tomorrow at 12 p.m. Yeah, but it's a good practice to do, and it's also a good mindset to have. But keep in mind, it's not about pointing fingers. It's about making stuff better. And that's it. Thank you. Already answered the questions that are in chat, but if there are any other questions, feel free to let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, Wesley. That was quite cool to see it in practice. So I wonder. So I didn't put my questions in the chat, but I hope I can ask them now.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess for this that it's, I mean, the whole monitoring part and keeping an eye on the effect of these experiments. I assume that's still very much up to yourself to ensure that monitoring is in place, and you don't really get any insights from the experiment other than they ran, right?
No, it does have, well, you can see it through the portal that it ran. It can incorporate into application insights. So you will see something like it went down. Okay. But to see what caused it you still need good monitoring. So I do recommend, implementing, if it's on virtual machines, do VM insights so you can see which process peaked, why did it peak, and you've got all those app insights features. So you would definitely have to enable that, or else you're pretty much just gonna, leave your ops team in the dark because they can see it went down, but they have to know why. They should have the monitoring in place to figure out which kind of experiments you started.
Yeah, cool. And then Alan typed in if there's any roadmap timeline for other resources, the functions, app service plans being added to Chaos Studio.
I currently do not know, but I will figure it out, and I will see how much I can share about that from the different channels. But I will, if I can, I will definitely come back and tell you what the roadmap is.
Cool. And that there's, aside from the experiments and the resources that you can set up, there's not integrations with other services, right? Because I'm thinking that Azure's load balancing, not load balancing, load testing tool could also be handy. Like if you're doing this in an isolated environment, to see how it affects your system, then having a constant load, if it's a website, for example. Having a constant load against the website, and then you run your experiments, and then see the result of that. And even if you run application insights, or if you ping against the website while the load test is running, that you could get some insights from that as well.
I think that would be a good practice in general to set that up. I think if you're gonna do so, not what we did now is it was just an empty virtual machine, right, with just IIS and no user load. But obviously, if you wanna do some really good chaos experimentation or chaos engineering, you would have to do it like you just described. You would have to have your average user load and then see what happens if you start, pushing it to the limit. And it's a VM skill set. It's an interesting one. That's also supported, but you can see that if you do that, it should start the auto scaling. And then what is the user impact? And then hopefully there will be support for Azure App Service in the future, where I think this would be really, really powerful, because then, we've got application insights. And if you didn't just do the codeless attach, but also incorporate it into your code, and you have a static load of users, and then you run a chaos experiment, I think then you would have a really, really good idea of what would happen if you can introduce a memory leak. That's basically what you could do, and then see, will it scale? Will the user notice? And eventually, how far will it scale? What's it going to cost me at the end of the month?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing you mentioned with being able to test like a regional failure, I mean, that would be super interesting to try out. And if it could even trigger like the parts in Azure that should fail over automatically. I mean, that I think that would be a killer feature from my perspective, at least.
And I think that, I mean, if this starts, I think there still needs to be a lot of development being done on this, right? Because it definitely, it feels preview, it looks like preview, but you can already do cool things. So now it's just something you can do cool things with. But you can see that even with the support for Cosmos DB, where you can simulate the regional failover. I mean, that's what I would want for all the resources, right? By just cut off my access to West Europe, and then see how good is our DR.
Yeah, I would love that for Azure Storage.
That would be, and then you will see that, then you will see what we all know what's happening in practice, that most will be configured with GRS to the partner region, but there's always going to be that one or two storage accounts with LRS configured by accident, because we either forgot the Azure policy or someone just went, no, this should be fine. And then you will notice that, all right, we got everything except for that, really important piece of user data, because it was LRS. And that would be the stuff I expect to find with chaos engineering in the future.
Yeah, that would be cool. Cool. Yeah. Well, I guess that's the end of the session. So I'll just add this, and just a word from our sponsors that we usually have, because these live streams are sponsored by Microsoft Denmark, who helps us keep this stream going. So we can keep it free for everyone to attend, which is great. So Microsoft Denmark, amongst other entities, I think, of Microsoft, have this initiative called Azure Heroes, where you can collect badges or badges. So this is the QR code for collecting a learner badge for today. They have this thing where you can collect all of these badges, and then I think you can exchange them for swag when you have a certain amount. You can also, through their website, add yourself to a map. And I heard from our contact at Microsoft that they are going to start randomly picking people who appear on the map and give them a prize. I assume that prize will be swag, but I'm just guessing. So
swag's good.
Yeah, swag is always good. So if you go in and add yourself to the map, scan this, collect the QR code, and add yourself to the map, then they might select you and send you a nice surprise, which is hopefully nice swag. I know that I got a swag pack not too long ago with a nice backpack that I always use, and some Microsoft socks to wear. Not that Microsoft socks.
I'm gonna try that in a bit.
But yeah, so thank you so much. I'll just remove this. Thank you so much for your time, Wesley, and taking us through Azure Chaos Studio.
Welcome.
Let's hope they add some more cool features to this, because that could be super interesting to set up and just have that run just randomly. I mean,
maybe we're going to be
maybe even in production when they're out of preview. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, maybe we're going to be back in a year doing a session where we're just going to turn off West Europe for enterprise scenario. That'd be cool. If that is if that's happening, then I'll come back and we're going to try that.
Yeah. We'll be back to turn off Western Europe.
All right. It sounds like a plan.
Cool. Okay. Well, I will stop the stream for now, and thank you again, and thank you to everyone who attended, who spent their lunchtime with us learning about the Azure Chaos Studio. So thank you, and see you next time. Hopefully in March. We have the next session we have coming up is March 22nd. which we will announce on our meetup page very soon. So hopefully see you then.
All right.
Bye.
See you then. Bye-bye.